Brilliant. Okay. Let's get started. Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this Elsewhen webinar. My name is Matt Satrivko. I'm head of marketing here at Elsewhen. So before we get started, I'll just give a little bit of background and some housekeeping stuff. So this webinar is being recorded and it will be viewable back at this link on YouTube. So if you want to share, if you think there's someone else who might be interested in what we talk about, you can just copy and paste this link. We have left the chat feature open. You should be able to see somewhere. So if you've got any questions, please feel free to contribute and I keep an eye on those. Bear in mind, there will be a little bit of a delay between us and what's broadcast. So if I'm not jumping on your question right away, that's what's going on. So who are Elsewhen other than the host of this webinar? So we are a digital product consultancy. What that basically means is we help leaders harness a cutting edge approach to design and technology to deliver a positive impact for their organizations. We do this for lots of different types of companies, different types of sectors. In insurance, which we're talking about today, companies like Zego, way back when we did some work with GoCo, in fact. We work across financial services more widely. We've done work for people like MasterCard, Citi, and we work with the big tech firms. The company started working with Google, and we work with Spotify right now. This is the first webinar we've hosted on YouTube Live, so any feedback, any kind of snags, any weirdness or anything like that, please let us know. And if you'd like to know more about Elsewhen and what we do, you can email hello@elsewhen.com or just find us on elsewhen.com. Okay, that's the end of my plug. So today we're talking about why now is the time for cultural change in insurance. Before we discuss what we mean by that and how we tackle that, let's kick off with some intros. So Sally, do you want to go first?
Sure. I have quite a strange career path to where I am now. I was originally studied as a journalist, and then I got really interested in tech and kind of converted over. And I've spent the majority of my career working in product roles across primarily the newspaper and publishing industry. I ran my own consultancy for a period of time, and then most recently I was actually doing innovation at Photobox, where I was developing their physical range of products. So kind of quite a wide remit of product. And I'm now VP of e-commerce at GoCo, and what that means is that I look after product, our website, how it functions, how we develop it, any of the innovation or any of the innovation projects that we're doing, looking to extend what we do. And then also look after all of digital marketing, so PPC, SEO, CRM, anything we do on social, paid social. It's quite a broad role.
Wow, okay. I didn't know you did all that marketing PPC stuff. We should catch up on that after this. Annette, do you want to...
Hello, everybody. So my career has been in human resources for, gosh, I won't tell you how long, but a long time. I've worked cross-sector, banking, manufacturing, and most recently insurance. Until the end of March, I was the Chief People Officer at Lloyd's. And I've been a brave girl. I was going to travel, please don't laugh, but I was going to take 3 months or so to travel in all the hotspots of the world, as it turns out. But instead, I've set up my own consultancy. I'm doing coaching, mediation, consultancy work, and really focusing with individuals and organisations on where do we go from here, how the pandemic has changed the world, and how do we move forward rather than keep looking backwards. So an opportune topic for us today, I think.
Thank you. And Mark?
So I've spent my life on kind of first half of it, absolutely frontline insurance, worked on Lloyd's syndicates, original claims, ended up running syndicates as businesses. So we have a small shared past with Annette, not that we worked together at that time. But the second half of my working life has very much been about setting up my own businesses, many of which are quite innovative within the areas that they operate in. I have a slightly unhealthy curiosity for the art of the possible and always asking why like a small child. So I quite enjoy doing that. So missing out big chunks in the middle of it, I kind of got into helping insurance businesses particularly, understand the strategies of growth. And if there's a couple of things that I really center on and I now do, it is that it's helping either incumbent businesses navigate growth, philosophical growth, or smaller startup, scale-up companies, actual physical growth doing in there. So, and much of that is around insurtech innovation. I co-founded and I invested in an insurtech business a few years back. So I kind of live my own dream and play on that front line. And that's where we have a nice working relationship with the guys at Elsewhen on design thinking and innovation.
Brilliant, thank you. So I suppose I'll kick off by talking about the fact, we can't really avoid COVID-19. It's the reason perhaps we're having this conversation online rather than in front of a panel or in front of an audience, sorry. But it's been a particularly potent moment for insurance, not always for good reasons, things in the press and so on. But one of the things I remember really striking me was that the Lloyd's of London shut its doors for the first time in its 366-year history. I mean, that's one example. I mean, there's examples like that, but that really struck me. And it really felt like a return to, business as usual, as perhaps maybe we were talking about even just, 3-4 months ago, is unlikely now, if not impossible. Annette, perhaps if I go to you here, if we take that example, Lloyd's trading floor, it's a very evocative image, closing its doors. What does the future hold, do you think, in terms of the workplace in insurance?
Oh gosh, we could probably spend hours having a really good debate about this, but let's just have a sort of summarize where we are and where we're going. I think this is a pivotal time for us. It's a really challenging time, both personally and professionally. Look at the economy, look at the working environment. We're in a situation where we don't know what the next 6-12 months are going to look like from an economy and working perspective. What we do know is that we can't look back. We cannot go back to the way things were, because actually we're unable to do that. We've seen a huge amount of agile thinking, change, transformation, innovation, actually, in the last 6 months. I look back on the way we were working, or I was even working 6 months ago, and it's just fundamentally changed. What's critical, I think, is that we focus on where we're going from here. The organisations, companies that are agile, can adapt their styles and approach and their business models, think about their employees, not just the individual relationship they have, but the wider relationship they have connecting with their families, their lifestyles, their lives, is going to become increasingly important. So I think, in summary, and to create a conversation starter with everyone else, this isn't just think about our employees, that is reflective of our customers as well. So our customers' lives have changed in many ways as well. So I think time to look forward and not back. We all hark after the way it was, but it's never going to be like that again. And I think we just need to be nimble and creative, but supportive going forward, and think about that connection with our customers and employees. Does that open the door for a debate, everybody?
Yeah, I think before, so that's interesting. So before, because there's the two really big pieces, perhaps before we think about customers and actually, the services and products that as insurers, as an industry, we're providing, I'm interested to know, so for example, Sally, when kind of COVID hit, or it materialized, like, okay, we're going to be closing the office here, but we need to kind of continue. Can you speak from personal experience? How did you respond? How did your team respond? What did you think?
Yeah, it was, you think back on that now, and that moment when you sort of started to realize what was happening, and it just all sort of seemed so incredible. And for me particularly, it was sort of super bad timing. It was just so crass to say, right? But I had only been in my role 4 months, and I had 4 new heads of department starting within the next sort of 3 or 4 months. And all of those people started remotely. And I think that's something we didn't think we we'd be able to do. Our tech desk were amazing in shipping out equipment to people. Our HR department set up an amazing onboarding program, and we worked really hard to try and build relationships, when people joined the team. But we'd also, we were just busy about to run a piece of customer research. And a big part of that for me was my team being able to go along and listen to that research. It's so important that you see people using your site and interacting with your customers. And I questioned, should we run this research or not? Are we going to should we just wait? And in the end, we're just like, no, we're just going to do it. We'll see where we get to. And doing difficult things like that we thought were going to be more difficult in this kind of in a remote way, proving that we still got massive value out of them. We actually got a much wider engagement across the company, because suddenly we could open it up to everyone. There wasn't like 6 people in a research suite. It was like anyone in the company could come and listen to this. And so we had people from compliance, engineers coming along and listening to the research. And then not very long after that, we had decided to do this thing called a design sprint. I'm not sure whether people have heard about it, but it's basically a very, very intensive week where you start with mapping a problem, then you work through different solutions, you build them and you test them, and you do that all in a 5-day period. We were like gearing up to do this. And of course, we came back to the same question, should we do this? We're all stuck in our houses, we're sick of looking at screens, should we do it? And we did. We ran this design sprint, and we learned a huge amount from that. One was that this thing that you were supposed to do, locked in a room with all the people deeply concentrated with your phones out of the way, that you could do this really effectively in a remote way. And we made video diaries of what was going on with that, both with our experience of trying to do it remotely and with this kind of new way of working in itself. And they were incredibly effective at kind of encouraging people around the organization to try to do things that you might be holding back on, and to kind of get over that barrier of trying to do things remotely. So we kind of did some quite hard stuff at the beginning. And I think as exhausting as that was, we learned a lot about what we were capable of, and actually, just that keep going and have a go. And you're going to have to adapt some stuff and use different tools to support remote working. But we found some of that really useful in kind of keeping our kind of culture live and keeping going with the work that we needed to be doing.
So it sounded like it was fair to say, I mean, you don't necessarily want to use this language about something so tragic, but there was a bit of an opportunity there. There was a bit of you didn't just treat it as like, okay, right, how do we do this stuff that we were going to do anyway remotely?
You ask yourself, how can we keep going? And you ask yourself, and your teams ask themselves, like, how do we get started? Let's get started and try and adapt and learn from what we're doing. And I think sort of longer term, I think we've started to see some really genuine opportunities from COVID for us as a company. And we probably talk about this a little bit later on, but our offices are based in Newport in Wales. And I think even people who live in Newport would hold their hands up and say that that's a complicated place to recruit into. And we're not even in the center of Newport. We're in a really nice office in a like an industrial park outside central Newport. So it's very difficult to pull people in from around the country, to attract talent from other places. And that's one thing we've really been able to do very successfully through COVID. Like, my marketing director's in London, we've just hired a design director who lives in Brighton, and we've been able to really extend our kind of recruitment pool, which has been brilliant, like a real challenge for that business that we've been able to overcome through COVID. And then the second area is that, the other thing about Newport is it's quite isolating. So people would tend to go to work and go home. They drive to work, drive home. A lot of my team didn't get to go to events. They didn't get to go to networking events. And they actually were quite disconnected from not only the insurance sector, but also of other sectors. And we've been able to suddenly bring people to the company. So we have a monthly series of talks where I can get anyone now to come and talk, because they don't have to travel to Newport and stay in a hotel, and that's been brilliant for the company. And also the opportunity, to do things like this, and for the team to take part in these types of things. It's much easier now in many ways to connect with events that for many of my team were very difficult to fit into their working schedules, or even into their lives, if they would have had to travel to London for a conference, or up to Manchester for a conference. So in many ways, those have been two big advantages for us and our teams.
100%. Yeah, I tend to do a lot of filmed marketing, so it's I've had the opposite, but certainly we won't be having this conversation. Perhaps I really want to bring Mark into this conversation. But I want to come back to that, and because I think it's really interesting about this idea. We've been trying to figure it out at Elsewhen. There's no need for the office for the workplace to take the same shape, that it has done historically. There's so many bits and pieces in there that now seem kind of arbitrary and seem kind of strange. And I like what you were saying about talking about customers, and perhaps Mark, there's somewhere where you could come in, which is, there's this danger that we go backwards instead of forwards, or we kind of, regardless of industry, we kind of things are starting to look rough, and we lapse into the old ways of doing things. And perhaps things that are on the line sheet, innovation, new product categories, new strategies, they go back on the back burner. So thinking about wanting to keep serving customers in new and interesting ways, how do we keep the momentum?
I think, in truth, the insurance sector has been very, very slow to the innovation table. I think over the last decade, when I often compare it to retail banking, we look at retail insurance, and with the moment of truth of 2008 and the financial crash and the loss of confidence in the banking system, it had to reinvent itself, fast acceleration of new organisations coming in, doing things different way. I think it's fair to say, because the insurance industry hasn't had that moment of truth, it's kind of done it by inertia, not because it really wanted to do it. So it feels a little kind of kicking and screaming. So if we were having this conversation 3, 4, 5 years ago, I'd have a fear that there hadn't been enough groundswell of change within the industry and reimagination, and some of the wonderful new roles that have come up in, incumbent insurance carriers, not just you, head of strategy, head of innovation, head of future thinking, customer engagement roles that sit in there. So there's a lot of now natural design thinking, which had got in by stealth, has properly embedded itself in the organization's infrastructure. And I think coming through the other side of COVID, I don't think there's a danger of going backwards. I think if there's a good danger, it's actually people have seen the benefits of accelerated growth in the way Sally described that it went through in her organization, and many others are seeing they need, and there is a benefit of that change, and obviously I will very much talk from a lens of the London specialty market, which is a completely different sector to the retail market. And what I've seen in the 6-9 months that this has gone on really has been that classic cope, adapt, fast learn and evolve. And actually now a desire that, do we actually want to go backwards? And and generally in the kind of nature of organizations, the older people tend to be at the top of the organizations. That's been part of the stalling in the past. But I think this kicking and screaming and the moment of truth has happened to them now, because they can't go to their underwriting room. The doors have been shut, as you described it. They've had to work remotely. They've had to pivot in the way they build relationships. And so much of the landscape I've inhabited really has been about face-to-face relationships, because it's a trust economy. And if you're dealing in balance sheet changing risks, or even national budget changing risks, you want to trust the person. You want to see them in the eye and do it. And that's been part of a strength and a barrier. So what I think it now comes to is a proper organised approach to innovation. So it's not about going backwards. I think it's about not having a laser focus on what the future needs to hold. And people will see not digitization of their business and actually the empowerment that smart tools put into it. What they'll actually see is we can just plug bits on, so we'll just keep putting smart little tools and toys on the side of the business, and they'll get into a kind of, rather than a linear innovation channel going forward, it will turn slightly more kind of lateral, and it will be on many fronts, and it will lack some organization. And I think it's really important people appreciate and learn from that now, because I've been in 43 years in the industry, and I don't see the reputation of the industry any better than it was when I first joined it, sadly. And it is still, insurance in too many places, seen as a product that has to be sold by an industry, not really wanting to be bought by the customer. And actually, many of the new companies valiantly and sitting on that vanguard of innovation are changing that methodology. And I think, sadly, not to stick over the negatives, but when you get a pandemic and it's the one time you want your insurance policies of business owners to really respond, and the first time you find that they might respond is when our regulator has actually had to put a case into the Supreme Court to get some kind of judgment. I think one has to be reasonably sensible about the court of the common man, what they figure about the insurance industry. So whilst it might be small in fact, massively ripple affecting reputational damage that the industry could come out of it. But it has a moment, and it has a moment to go forward. It has a moment to change, and it has a moment to learn from that and properly build proportionate insurances, on appropriate terms that actually get to the heart of what people want to insure and when they want to insure it. So, the world of pay-as-you-go, some of the peer-to-peer, some of the parametric insurances that are coming out, absolutely signpost to what the future should look like, in my small and humble opinion.
Yeah, I mean, but there's things in terms of like, I mean, it'd be interesting. I know you and I could talk a lot about insurtechs. I know you spent background in Lloyd's, but you've invested in and worked with insurtechs, and there is at these times there is the danger that funding starts to dry up. It becomes difficult to acquire new customers. It's smaller companies, small insurtechs are forced to consolidate, and you lose that kind of existential threat, perhaps, to the incumbent providers, because a bit like you're talking about with the banks, which is what I have a slightly more experience with. You need that sometimes the change is forced upon you, right? There's that threat, and that it doesn't really work unless there's the kind of cultural mindset shift.
Yeah. So can I will jump in, because I think you make absolutely the right point, and it's, I think, the right time to kind of respond to it. Way too many insurance businesses are running on thin vapor margins. The combined operating ratios of these organizations isn't great. So they work really hard every year to do no more than actually stand still in what is, as I described, a disenfranchised relationship. So the incumbents have already seen that. And, in particular, if you do go to a Lloyd's play, Lloyd's as its own regulator, as a corporation that sits across the top of it, are getting, really, really punchy over accepting business plans that their managing agents, the syndicates that trade in there, are putting forward about cutting the operating cost of these organizations, in leaps and bounds, cuts that need to go through. So actually, they don't have a place to stay still. I think, you made a really, really important point, is it can't be about small insurtechs dealing with large kind of, clunky incumbents that sit there. There's a common agility that needs to come in the middle of this relationship, and that's the culture change. Because if they can learn to play nicely together, there's so much good that will make a real step change to the industry in a very, very short period of time. If it carries on as the way you framed it, as almost a kind of, big master, small servant distributor, in whether that's an MGA, a broker, a cover holder, or a direct customer, the dial's not going to move on, and it's going to be about what an insurance company thinks he needs to sell, not what people really want to buy, and what distributors can really take out and move their curve on. And I do believe there is a loud enough voice now that sits out there. The insurtech community is strong. It is robust. By its nature, it will grow. People will come. People will go. But it's got itself organised. There's the Insurtech UK Trade Association that has worked really hard during the lockdown to make sure the insurtech community has got a fair voice, and actually a relevant voice to what the future shape of insurance needs to look like. Because it sounds very negative, but it doesn't look right at the moment, and it's not looked right for a while now. But I sit in my place. I'm not going to put Sally on the spot, but because of what Sally does and what her business does, she really sits on the vanguards of what customers are looking for. And it's those voices that need to be listened to much more by the incumbents that, somewhat sit in ivory towers behind closed doors, not really engaging in that narrative.
Yeah, sorry, so I don't know if you want to jump in there, but it does, I mean, I'm trying to be fair to everyone, but it does feel like your organization is one that starts from a position of customer centricity a little bit more, in terms of it certainly before propositions like GoCo came along, there was that kind of thing didn't exist. You needed to kind of rethink the very models of how something, like the brokering of insurance for the mass market is done.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, sure. If you wind back 14 years ago, the challenge that customers had then was that they would call up 4 different insurers and they would provide all their details, and then they'd have to manually compare prices. And that really was the problem that price comparison websites were trying to solve. But you roll forward to now, and what customers go and do is they go and type all their details into 4 different price comparison websites, and then they manually compare all the deals that they got on those websites. And so actually, kind of one of the things that we talk about a lot is that the power of what we do in itself, comparing prices, is diminishing. The administrative effort around that is still very much a pain point for the customers. And in many ways, as price comparison websites, we've taken on that pain. It's our site that they fill in all the boring fields on and deal with all the stuff on. And so really what we're trying to do is look beyond that. So comparing available prices in a market is only one point in your insurance journey. You know, you're actually comparing it to the renewal letter that you got through the post. You are thinking about a lot of different things, and just the price is not just the thing that you're comparing on. And so I think kind of where we got to with our customer work and our understanding of what's important to customers is you see that coming through in our 250 excess policy. So that fundamentally aligns with the fact that we believe in some cases excess is unfair. So if your car gets stolen, you do not get your excess back unless they find some way to claim that money back from, and you don't get that money back. And that seems fundamentally unfair. And so this proposition was developed sort of about 18 months ago now. It's been live for over a year, where we cover people's excess. So you take your car insurance out through GoCo, you get your excess paid. And what we've been finding is that really resonates with customers who have been through the pain, particularly those who have had to make a claim, and who understand the value of that. And that's where we think the differentiators sort of come from, in or the direction that we see kind of innovation driving for price comparison, I suppose specifically, is really understanding where are the unfair problems in this market that we can help to solve, where are the things that customers are struggling with or that they don't feel are right. And some of that, sure, is about making that price comparison easier. So using available data sources to make it easier for customers to compare prices, by having a lot more transparency around add-ons and making it easier for them to work out what the right coverage is for them, but also then in kind of differentiating in terms of the offer. And all of that comes from constantly talking to customers about what's going on for them and what they struggle with.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting. I mean, I feel like GoCompare is a bit, you know, my last point is a company that has that kind of thinking, that kind of methodology of almost nothing being sacred, you know, in its DNA. And that you're someone who's worked, you know, in you know, the oldest insurance institution in the world. Probably Mark will probably put me right on that. But you know, there's that need for, there has to be that desire for cultural shift in an organization like that.
I tell you what, I was struck by listening to Sally, and I think the Lloyd's market and its participants in that have something to learn, and we're all at different points within the market. But I would say, Sally, it was great to hear about an organisation that has taken on board the changing environment, the changing needs of their employees, and adapted to that very quickly and at pace. You know, you talked about virtual hiring, virtual onboarding, fact that you've got people working all over the place, but you are virtually coming together as a team and making decisions, and it doesn't matter where you live and what you do. I think you've discovered, as have many organisations, that you don't all have to be in the same room to be one team and one approach. But what you do have to do is find a different way of bringing people together. But loved the sprints, you know, big advocate of Six Sigma and Lean. So I love sprints and that approach. That is the way to get things done, and you can do it virtually, which you've shown. But equally, we all know that if you're going to react to your customers and change in line with their changing requirements, you've got to be agile yourself. So I think there's a lot to be learned from, you've got to think and you've got to be agile and you've got to adapt with the change that's coming. But equally, it's not just about adapting for now, it's preempting what's next. And Sally, you were just talking about preempting the customer's needs, whether without specifically saying that, you're talking about what are their needs done for, what's right, what's fair, how can we help support them? So you've almost got to become psychic and preempt that as well, which requires a different agility as well within your organisation. So I think there's a lot to learn from that. It is tough though. I think people can easily forget how tough it is to change a culture, to change behaviours. There has to be a reason to do it, an incentive to do it. There's nothing like a crisis, as difficult as it is, to force change. I know that there were many people that said, well, working from home will never work. It will never work for the insurance market. I think the last 6 months have proven that it does. All right. So we've got through that one. What are the other myths and fables that we need to break down now that we can show that we can make changes and it can be successful? I think innovation, fintech, insurtech, there's a lot of great ideas out there. And I think the Lloyd's Lab does a great job of identifying new ideas, supporting those ideas. How can we do more of that on a remote way? But also as well, for me, something I learned a very long time ago, I used to work for Ford Motor Company, it's called concept to customer. It was link between every employee and the customer. Every employee had to know and preempt and think about what this product would mean for a customer. And Lloyd's Bank, when I used to work there, used to go and have to work in a retail bank and serve customers, even if you never worked there. So how can we preempt our customers' needs and get closer to them and bring that back into insurance, I think, which is what I think you were talking about with Go Compare, Sally. It's preempting those needs.
We that's just reminded me of, it's a great point in it. It's just reminded me of, we don't do it at Go Compare yet, but Sky used to have this brilliant thing called customer contact hours. And if you worked in marketing or product or kind of anything where you were working out kind of future products, you had to have a certain number of customer contact hours per month. And that was sitting in the call center, listening to calls, going out in the vans with like installation guys, or going to a research session. And that was brilliant for like just reminding people that actually this is important as your CPD, you know, and your compliance training and stuff like that. You should be having customer contact, because that's where the ideas come from, but it's also where your empathy and your understanding of what customers are trying to do comes from.
Yeah,
it's funny. I wrote down as Annette was talking there again, you know, an old adage that was in my life is, you know, when you talk, you learn nothing. When you listen, you learn everything. And I think something that the insurance industry could pay good heed to other sectors is learn to listen and then listen to learn, you know, so that just absolutely get on spot, live in the shoes of your customer, what they're going through, and not sometimes being seen as the kind of the peer problem solver. You know, I think a lot better co-collaboration, you know, is great. And I mentor at the Lloyd's Lab within there, so I get good first-hand experience. And that's a really good example of people that naturally wouldn't have played nicely together in the past, coming into a room, spending 3 months with each other. And I genuinely think people learn on both sides of that. ... I'm not quite sure the incumbents that are going into the lab have quite worked out what to do with the strange fellows that come out of the lab, you know, of where do they take them on. But that's just part of their evolution. But it does throw up, and again, you know, to your point, Annette, about, you know, you like your Sigma 6 and your lean learning. I'm just a great advocate of micro innovation just within any organization. I just think if you can just sit, co-collaborate, learn some little things, do some stuff, have a little experiment in a controlled environment, you're not going to change the world, but all those little bits come together to suddenly you don't recognize the company in a good way a year down the line from where you started. And I think that's something that many in our industry could learn from, and probably go out of sector to see where that works effectively in other you know, industry sectors.
I think experimentation, isn't it? Sorry, Sally. The ability to take risks and to try things out. How many times was the light bulb tried out? Was it 1,000 times before it finally worked? We're not very good at saying to people it's okay to try it out for it not to work, because actually that's how the better ideas.
Yeah. But sorry, Sally, because I've just one very quick point, because I know you're going to say something. And I do think this is the big culture change. I think it's the fact that we've got to go through this, but it needs a holistic change right from the top in these organisations that are working at thin margins. So it's lovely to experiment, lovely to do the stuff, but if actually, you're working on a 2% profit margin, it's really tough to invest in that. So I think there's an ask here, not just for the businesses. And again, most of the businesses that we will become exposed to are backed by larger organizations, funds, PE backers, investors, shareholders, and the like, is actually invest in it. Put stuff in to actually allow your businesses to do this as a proper piece of cultural philosophy that is ingrained in the company. Don't play at innovation. And again, I'll be very delicate in how I talk of it, because some of them are my customers, but some of them aren't very good at innovation because they see it as a function, not even as a strategy. It should be a philosophy. It's what gets you out. Again, and I say it gets tough for me because I've had an unhealthy curiosity my entire life to want to make things change, and that's what I do. But if we could get more of that in the middle, and some of this, the fun, the play, the gamification, some of that micro innovation that goes along, I just think we'd all move on a lot quicker. Sorry, Sally, I
yeah, no, not at all. In fact, you just built on the point I wanted to make, which is brilliant, because I wanted to pick up on your micro innovation points, and I don't know if this is helpful for people or not, but the way that we think about it is we have a head of innovation, and she looks after stuff that's going to break the model. So things that there's no P&L modeled in for that. There's no upside in any given year for what she's doing. It's purely experimental. That money is there to test out different ways of doing things, entirely different ways of doing things. And she doesn't actually have a team. She pulls people in from around the company to do a piece of work, and then they kind of go back. And then we have our kind of core teams who look after our core products and websites. So we have a car team and a home team, for example, for those two core insurance products. And those teams, we use a squad model, which is increasingly popular. It was started by Spotify. There's some great videos out there that people can go and watch to get a sense of it. But the point of a squad is that it's not just engineers building a website and product people trying to decide what they should be building. You basically collate a team around a problem, and our teams get given an area to focus on. So for example, we have a team specifically looking at supporting customers when they come back to make it faster and easier for them to re-quote or find quotes that they've done before. And that team sets the specificity of their goals. So they'll say, look, we're going to look at the returning customer journey, and we're going to really focus on logging in, because that's always a nightmare on every site that you look at, right? And they set themselves very specific goals on that, and we will have people from compliance involved in that. Sometimes it's people from our partnerships team who look after the insurers. And that team they're not goaled on what the thing is that they're going to do. So we're not saying, deliver us a new log on thing. They are there to move a metric or to achieve a goal. So what we want to know is that it's 20% faster for someone who's been to the site before to get to a price. That might be the goal that they set themselves. And that is all about enabling teams to find innovations, to find micro innovations, because they can carry on filling stuff with things that actually, if we did this totally differently, if we went back to some first principles from e-commerce and looked at this in a different way, here's how we'd want to do it. And those teams are supposed to be empowered to make those decisions. They play those back to the risk department company. We have our ability to input on that and to challenge them on how they've made their decisions. Have they asked customers? Have they tested things with customers? Are they going to A/B test it? Have they used data to decide how to do it? But the point is, it's a totally different way of forming a team around a problem that's a kind of a BAU problem, but it also should enable elements of those micro innovations that you just referenced to come into your everyday redesign of experiences and as you're working on your products. That model's been, I think, effective for us, both through kind of COVID, because we were really used to working in these teams that don't necessarily all sit together, but also kind of very effective at solving big, complex problems, because you have a group of people who are really focused on what it could look like and then executing on that.
Yeah, I really like the idea of thinking in terms of goals. In banking, one of the things that they used to talk about was, I think insurance has a lot in common, is, there's these products, so there's product types, there might be whole buildings built around, the sale and kind of innovation or development within existing products, a credit card or a mortgage or things like that. But instead of thinking about those on that product layer, that you could think in terms of, okay, what are we actually trying to achieve here? So if we give this team within the business, we give them autonomy to think around a challenge, what would they actually change? What would they really rethink? Maybe they would rebuild insurance products exactly as they are right now. Maybe that's the best possible way of solving this problem. Or actually, if you're not afraid as a business to give people autonomy and potentially cannibalize your existing offering, what you're already doing as a business, that's where real innovation happens. There's been a couple of really good questions that have come up, which I can see, and I think it maybe ties two things we've been talking about, which is talking about innovation, so from a kind of that may be a technological perspective, but also in terms of thinking about talent. Because one of the real ways that you kind of get innovation is you bring in new, diverse talent, people who can bring it. I'm taking credit here for Peter Jackson, who's very. Annette, do you want to? I can see you.
Oh, it's a topic I'm passionate about, as you can imagine. But I think, again, the opportunities that have come out of this difficult time from a talent perspective, by the description Sally's given about not having to be Newport based anymore, means it's just opened up a whole world of talent, multi-generational, global, 24/7, etc. So if we think differently, we are able to tap into a whole different resource and talent pool. The other thing I would say to you is maybe not hire for what you were or what you had, but hire against what you want to be. So for the change you want to be in the world, more innovative, more creative, etc. Because actually we quite often restrict creation and innovation, etc., by wanting people to conform to where we were and what we stood for, rather than who we want to be going forward. And I'd also say, actually, I'm going to say this, but diversity, but I don't just mean the diversity we all think about, it's the neurodiversity as well, different backgrounds, experience, education, as well as gender, ethnicity, etc. It's about thinking in a totally different way to say, actually, I want to challenge my own thinking and not have people conform to the way I want them to think. And that's quite brave. It's quite tough to get your existing managers and leaders to do. So maybe it's about getting a completely different mindset about who you are and who you want to be, and bringing those skill sets and experiences in to support that.
Can I ask a question across that myself, Annette? Because, and again, looking down the lens of the London market, it's brought in institutional talent. Let's be honest about it. Most people that have come in, they come through a certain channel. They end up working in certain ways, and I fear that a problem that the city generally will face, and I think the insurance industry isn't inured from it, is those within the people side of the businesses really are not properly tuned into social mobility in the way you describe it, and that they will look down degree students and they'll go down that tertiary education part of it, and they won't go to the 16, 18-year-olds that are equally talented, but these are streetwise kids that need an opportunity, want an opportunity, and they would really freshen that gene pool very, very quickly. And I'm not. And I will say this on the record, I'm not painting this at Lloyd's, because I think Lloyd's has got a damn sight better. And, it doesn't do that anymore, but it's still not seen as, here's the 5 places someone as an 16 or 18-year-old is going to leave school. Where would you go and work? Would Lloyd's be sitting on that list? Would an investment company, would a consultancy firm be sitting on there? I'm just interested what your view about social diversity.
A whole separate discussion about this, but let me just give you a snapshot into. I think we've made huge progress within the insurance sector more generally about getting different talents in and opening up our own mindsets to the opportunity and what those different backgrounds and experiences can bring in. Huge progress made, way more to do. But for me, it goes all the way back to school and education. I'm really sorry, insurance sector, but it's not seen as the most exciting sector to be in, all right? Whereas actually, there are some fantastic careers and opportunities in there. And every profession that you need in other corporate business environments, you need in insurance as well. But there's a huge opportunity for innovation, as we've talked about as well. But I'll be really honest, and I've got a 19-year-old who did business A level and is doing a degree in business. They don't do anything about insurance. It's banking, it's design, you know, Disney, all sorts of things. Wouldn't it be great? And I did this with engineering, go all the way back to schools and start to weave in about the, you know, business cases, examples with insurance, get people talking in, get them mentoring, offering work placements. We're doing that, but we need to do it on a much, much bigger scale. All right. Then you get to the, does somebody really need a degree to come into insurance? Actually, apprentice placements, intern placements, all fantastic opportunities. Apprenticeships are open to all ages now, and backgrounds and experiences. Use that apprenticeship levy. I sound like a sales pitch here now. Use that levy because you've got to pay it anyway. So you might as well use it. And then graduate placements, the more you can do to offer placements to different backgrounds, experiences, and incentivize that, attract people in, the better. The other thing I would say, just as a plea for now, there are a large number of people that are losing their jobs from other sectors. They are talented individuals, very different backgrounds and experiences, but just think of the richness of the experience and their backgrounds that they could bring to the sector. So I think it's also the biggest thing that was always said to me, well, they can't work here because they've never worked in insurance. That's not true. Actually, some of the most successful people now are from outside the sector that are bringing in that different background and experience. So I don't think you have to have an insurance background. So those are just some examples of opening up our mindset from different backgrounds and experience, but equally, let's get out there and talk about what fantastic careers and opportunities there are within the sector and just open it up a bit, because it's a bit of a closed, it's only when you're in there you realize what a wonderful place it is, and it shouldn't be a secret.
It's really interesting, Annette, because I think you've just landed the point that I think is really important, which is how this industry is portrayed to candidates and to people who might be interested. So I've never worked a day in insurance in my life until I started at GoCo last November, and I would never have considered it as an industry, but it was only when I got approached for the job and then started looking at what was going on, and the kind of parallels I drew to the publishing industry were that it's an industry on the verge of disruption. Yeah. And there's about to get really, really interesting. And that makes it a fantastic place to do innovation and product, because you get to break things, you get to fail at things, you get to run fast, you get to challenge everything, you get to ask why all the time, and you get to ask your customers all of the, customers suddenly become the center of everything that you're doing. And that's the space that I love working in. So I could see kind of these parallels from industries where I've had the most fun in my career. And I could see that, that was what drew me into insurance. But I think you're absolutely right, being able to tell that story more broadly externally, and then looking at ways to draw people in. So we have the Go Further Academy, where we support people to do their degrees, primarily in the programming space, and they do internships with us through that program, and that's been very successful, both in terms of kind of bringing people into our organization, but also supporting people to kind of get going with their careers. And then we're also looking at the school leaver program that I can't talk too much about now, but that's specifically targeted at kind of communities around where our office is, where there are less either further educational opportunities or less opportunities to kind of go and build careers. And it's one of the things that us, amongst other companies in Wales, have been really good at developing and investing in that kind of local education infrastructure.
Okay, I've got to jump in because we've got just under 10 minutes left, and there was something I really wanted to ask all of you about, and it was another question that we had from the chat from someone called Rabbits from Hats, and they talked about COVID being a shock to the corporate system. Has made leaders realize that embracing different ways of working can work, and we've talked about that. Perhaps you can actually improve engagement with customers, can improve productivity among teams. They asked, but how sticky, to use that language, do you think the COVID experience will be? Or do you think leaders will tend towards the old norm? So to kind of paraphrase that, let's imagine, COVID is cured tomorrow. It's possible for everybody to go back to the office, pile back onto the tube. how much of new ways of working, new ways of thinking that perhaps have been thrown up stick around, or do we, hand on heart, do we go back at these big companies just back to business as usual, and it's kind of and nothing's learned? So a kind of a final question that anyone can grab there.
Well, I'll give you an insight from I'm doing quite, as I said to you, quite a lot of consulting and coaching at the moment. I can tell you the talent out there, either within organisations or external to organisations, will not go back to working the way things were. They will either move to someone that does respect different ways of working and innovation, or they will literally choose to walk as and when the time's ready, and they will judge how much the culture has changed and how much they're being forced to try and go backwards as opposed to looking forwards. So I would say to organisations, if you want to attract and if you want to retain talent, make sure you keep moving forward and not trying to go backwards with working practices, because it will be a differentiator.
That's interesting. Yeah, so talents effectively will act with their feet, and they'll take the decision out of management's hands. Anywhere else? I mean, Mark, we've spoken a lot about in terms of innovation, new product types, new ways that perhaps customers want to purchase insurance products, and new ways of selling insurance products. Do you think that there are exciting things that are here to stay, or is there a danger, margins are tighter than ever, the industry will lapse back into,
I'll also, if you don't mind, I will put a point across top of what Annette said, and we do talk about this quite a lot. Employees were demanded to do a lot of extraordinary things this year, and employee power, I think, is very much a thing now. And firms are going to have to be careful if they might dictate that they want people to go back in a different way, but people are living their lives in different ways. They've found other ways of working. There's a different work-life balance that sits out there. And generally, and it's only generalization to those that you get exposed to in your own lives, certainly a lot that I talk to just don't have a desire to want to go back, jump back on a train and go and get on that tube. And if someone forced them to do it, they'd leave. Again, as you know, I spend a fair bit of my time in and around entrepreneurs, and many of those, when Annette talks about apprenticeships and like that, many are looking for plan B now. If I've mentored a couple of employee friends during lockdown that are exploring ideas because they just realise they want to live their life in a different way now. So I think part of that choice is going to go away from companies, and they need to listen very, very carefully to what their employee engagement is going to look like going forward. I think to your other point, I'll just very simply go back to what I kind of started my first ramble at you about of the perception of the industry when it the kind of the hand is on the fire. It's done a huge amount of good things. I fear that once again, when people reflect on it, it will be more about the things that it didn't do. And I think Sally made a good point about the deductible buyback. People want solutions. They want stuff that's going to work for them. And that's kind of what the insurance industry's got to do. And I think it's a no option to go back, because if they don't do it, visionaries, if I might say that about, GoCo and what they're doing, will do it. People outside of the industry will come in and do it. And actually, insurance as a concept will, in many parts, get lost into other parts of kind of commercial transactions. So, Internet of Things and Neos that put their smart home thing in a few years back and started just burying and embedding insurance as part of a bond and a guarantee. Much simpler products like parametric insurance, where trigger goes, the money's in your bank account, you don't even think about you're going to make a claim. That's simple to use, simple to access. Yeah, that's one end of the spectrum. Of course, you have the major complex insurance, and that is going to carry on doing what it's going to do. And it has some different challenges of responding to a world post-COVID and different economies and different potentially regulatory and legal landscapes about the future of work. I wouldn't want to be a directors and officers liability underwriter thinking about, the risks that are going to confront me if I force people back into my office and any of them contract COVID. I think that would just be, Annette has to worry about that one. I don't, but it's kind of, so I just don't think we can go back. I just don't think that the world would allow us to go back.
And it's I'm kind of excited to see what those changes and what those innovations will be. And it's probably going to be one of those things where, to a certain extent, it will either happen, like I think we said last time we spoke, it will happen to the big players, or it'll happen by the big players. Now, payments was something that banks did. You wanted to pay someone, a bank did it. PayPal, Klarna, everything that's become a totally its own industry, its own thing, and it's $1 billion thing that's no longer provided by the banks. I wonder what parts of the existing insurance ecosystem similarly get pulled out, and as a result of what's been happening in the world, people not wanting to use insurance products in the way they've been expected to. So definitely very interesting. Okay, we're just about out of time. So thanks to all of you. That was genuinely really interesting. I've been scribbling lots of notes all the way through, stealing all your good ideas. So anyone who tuned in, or maybe tuned in a little bit late, as soon as we finish this broadcast, it will be available at this link on YouTube. If you're interested to know more about Elsewhen, so I'm going to do one last little plug. It's elsewhen.com, or you can email us hello@elsewhen.com. I will update the description on the video so that you can learn more about the 3 panelists we had today, and any more information about them. Brilliant. So thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you.
See you all soon.
Thank you so much. Lovely to meet you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.